Well, hello and welcome to the Boatnik. Today I'm going to try to cut out a rotten section of bunk plywood in a Com-Pac 16 here without taking the deck off. It's on this end up here, everything's good. It's just that last 3.5 feet back in here that's rotten. And this is an example of owners causing a problem, I guess you could say. The last boat owner ran an electric trolling motor on this boat, and he ran a wire down through here and drilled holes up here to put hangers to hold the wire in place, and did not seal the bolts at all, and used just regular mild steel bolts, which rusted out, and the bolts were just not even tightened up. They were loose, so when it rained, water just dripped around every single bolt hole. And the 6-inch port that's down at the end, he just left that out for the wires to come out to connect the electric trolling motor. And the boat was out in the weather, so obviously, when it rained, water came straight in. And so this whole end of this bunk on this side only constantly stayed wet, and it has pretty much rotted out. That whole back side there is pretty much rotted out. So I'm going to cut this at 48 inches. That's about the biggest piece I can realistically get in here anyway. But from this point toward me, it's 100% fine. It's good. It starts to get bad on back there away. So I'm going to cut it right here. This was like an inspection hole where they poured the foam, the 2-part foam in from the factory, and it used to have a little piece of plywood covering it up. That's all that is. But I'm going to use that for my cutting point right there, and that makes it about 47 inches long or something like that. I'm going to set my saw at a 55-degree bevel, which is as steep as I can go. And I'm going to just run it right down this side right here and cut it as far as I can cut it with a skill saw. And then I'll use a oscillating saw to finish cutting the very tip end out there, and to cut up, square out my corner here. And I'll cut what I can right here with the skill saw, and then I'll finish that with the oscillating saw in the corners there as well. And then that should pop up. And I do not know the condition of the stringers underneath it. Hopefully they're okay. But I am determined to make this repair without taking the whole deck off. The deck does not leak, and like I said, the other side, there's nothing wrong with the other side. So it's just this one spot. This is not going to be fun. It's certainly not for the claustrophobic, but it is doable with difficulty. But it is doable. Now I've got to square me up a line here first. So I want to know where to quit cutting. Okay, there's that. I'm using a Bosch skill saw, which will turn to a 56 degree angle, and I'm going to just do a drop cut right there, and then just run that saw straight down that side. And I'm pretty much going to be following the edge of the fiberglass where it's tabbed into the hull. That's kind of what's going to be happening here. And this is actually a pretty easy repair to do if the deck is off, but because it's just a pretty isolated spot, I just don't. I'm hoping that I can do this repair and not have to go through all of the trouble of having to remove the whole deck structure and then have to reseal it and all that kind of stuff. We'll see. We'll see. Okay, so that's all I can cut with the skill saw. Everything else has to be cut with something else. And then here I just have a little oscillating saw, which works pretty good for places like this. Now down here at this end it's pretty rotten, so I'm gonna probably have to dig it out all the way to the hull here and retab it in, and maybe the whole way up. But anyway, whatever it is, it's what it is. I've got to get this out and then kind of go from there. Okay, just drop that out of there with the skill saw. Undercut there at that 55 and there, at that 55, and then everything else is just cut square. And I just cut that curve there with the skill saw. Just set it to the shallow enough depth to where it'll force it to curve. This is marine plywood. This is true marine plywood. It is fir. Fir is very water resistant, rot resistant, and every layer is fir. And it's very stiff, very, very, very strong. And like I say, it's pretty rot resistant and moisture resistant and all that too. Now that said, I will seal every single edge and also the bottom surface of it. I will seal with epoxy resin. And then once I've installed it in the thickened epoxy and all that, I will coat the whole top of it with epoxy resin as well, and then tab it back in, down that length there all the way through. Okay, now I've got the finished panel cut to size, and I'm gonna see if I can dry fit it in place before I do anything else. And then if it fits, and if I can get it back out, I will epoxy encapsulate it all, and then tomorrow, yeah, that's going to work. That's going to work. I'm not sure I'm going to get it back out though. You'll notice I'm not leaving it hard tight to the hull over here because I don't want to transfer a hard point or a hard spot in the hull. I've got just about enough room to stick my finger through right there to where it's not going to touch the actual hull itself. It'll just be touching the tabbing. And that's kind of important when you're working on a boat, not to introduce really, really hard spots. And I may have to open that right there up just a fraction more right there to get it in, but it's going to work. It's going to work. I have to put a cleat on the bottom of this at the far end before I put it all the way in as well. I got to remember to do that. And I've got to drop in my reinforcing partners or sisters down this stringer over here. But I just wanted to make sure that this was going to work here first, and it looks like it's going to work. Now I'm going to take this out and coat it with epoxy resin. I'll cut my strips and get all those coated too for that, rebuilding that stringer. I'm going to leave the top of it probably not sealed yet until I actually get it in place, and then I'll coat it as I work my way out doing the tabbing and all that. But this is going to take, all total, this is probably going to take 3 hours or so total, maybe 4 hours, versus removing the whole cockpit deck, assembly, and then have to reseal the holding deck joint and all that, and redo everything and the rubber rail and all that, which takes 3 or 4 days. So as tight as this is, it still makes sense from a standpoint of time as well as money and effort, labor, to do it like this, rather than take the whole boat apart. Let's see if I can get this back out here. I got most of that out of there. I got to be careful not to hit the actual hole itself, because it cut right through that hole. Just making sure I didn't hit the hole anywhere. Yeah, I didn't. Okay. I don't want to leave any of this debris in here, especially the wood debris, or it'll just be laying in there rotting. We get out all the big pieces by hand, and then use the shop vac and get out the dust. I've got to saturate these edges here with epoxy resin before I put the thickened on too, to pre-wet all this out, and plus all that top edge of that stringer there. All of that will get wetted out with thin epoxy. Put any of the thicken, even underneath that tabbing, all of that will be wetted out with epoxy resin, unthickened first, and then I'll let that not quite tack over, and then I'll put the thickened on it, and then slide everything in place. My flashlight's about to die here, but that was probably about 3 hours worth of work to get that cut out and cleaned up, and then set back in thickened epoxy and all. And that's including using thin epoxy on all of the edges and the bottom and all that kind of stuff. I'm still working on this Com-Pac 16. I just got through replacing this little, I guess you would call it a little mini bulkhead here at the end of the bunk there. So you can see down in there. It's a lot easier to keep the old tabbing than it is to cut it off and then grind it all out and put it back. And this works pretty good doing it this way. Like I said, literally pulled out all of the rotten wood all the way down to the hull and cleaned it out, scraped it out real good, and then filled it full of thickened, not full, but about half full of thickened epoxy. Enough so that when I put the new board in, that I would, the thickened would squeeze up the sides and all that. And I got squeezed out all the way around it really good. So it's bonded at the bottom and on both sides, good with that thickened epoxy. And then I've got it covered with a couple of layers of cloth, saturated with epoxy resin. And again, it's tabbed in back there. I did a fillet of thickened epoxy, and then I let my cloth run about 2 or 3 inches up onto the bunk itself, so it's tied back to the bunk too. And so now there's not a place there for water to run down in there. use the 1708 to tab that place back in that I had cut out for fitting the plywood in. Here's where I've been working in this Com-Pac 16, but I've got it all patched up and everything's coated with epoxy resin, and all the joints are fiberglass taped in. And I did have to do that one repair there where I had to cut a slot to get that plywood up underneath that old tabbing there, so I could save the old tabbing. So once that cures enough, I can clean it good and give it a light sanding and then paint it. I don't have any of this gray paint on hand right now. All I've got is white, so I think I may order some gray and just paint it back with the gray. So that is very tight working up in there, but it is doable without having to remove, the overhead of the deck. So it is doable with difficulty, but doable.